Welcome again. I'm Castleberry, and this is another one of my philosophical lecture shorts. Today we're going to be talking about ethical egoism, and in particular, Ayn Rand brand of it. We're trying to do it real quickly so we keep the video short. First off, ethical egoism, I want to distinguish it between psychological egoism, whereas psychological egoism is a descriptive form of ethics, okay, where it just basically says that all human beings are selfish. Ethical egoism is saying something quite different. Most ethical egoists believe that you actually can be selfless, do an act only for the others and not good for yourself. But what the ethical egoist is claiming is that actually it's a bad thing. It is actually good to be self-interested. And typically, you should always be self-interested. You should always do something that looks out for, number one, you. But now, to kind of make sure we don't get too confused with this, there's a big difference between what one wants, okay, and what is best for one, okay? Most ethical egoists don't believe you should just go around doing what one wants. I may want this Xbox One right now, but I don't have the money, but I want to steal it, so I take it. I might want that right now, but the problem is that might not be in my best interest. If I get caught and go to jail, do I really want that? And so what most ethical egoists are saying is it's always good to be self-interested when it comes to what is best for you, number one, okay? Now the main kind of really popular philosopher who has kind of pushed that in the 20th century was Ayn Rand, okay? She was born in Russia, in Bolshevik Russia, and her parents fled here to the United States. So you'll see she's not a fan of communism, okay? She died in 1982, and her main idea is she's trying to actually promote that we should always, okay, be self-interested. This is something we should always do. And she actually, go right here, she actually claims that it is irrational to be an altruist. And if we just take her essay, The Ethics of Emergencies, where a lot of this is coming from, we can see this right away. She claims psychological results of altruism may be observed in the fact that a great many people approach the subject of ethics by asking such questions as, should one risk one's life to help a man who is A, drowning, B, trapped in a fire, C, stepping in front of a speeding truck, or D, hanging by his fingernails over an abyss? Now, consider the implications of that approach. If a man accepts the ethics of altruism, he suffers the following consequences in proportion to the degree of his acceptance. 1, a lack of self-esteem, since his first concern in the realm of values is not how to live his life, but how to sacrifice it. 2, a lack of respect for others, since he regards mankind as a herd of doomed beggars crying for someone's help. 3, a nightmare's view of existence, since he believes that men are trapped in a malevolent universe where disasters are the constant and primary concern of their lives. And 4, and in fact, a lethargic indifference to ethics, a hopelessly cynical amorality, since his question involves situations which he is not likely ever to encounter, which bear no relation to the actual problem of his own life, and thus leave him to live without any moral principles whatsoever. Okay, so she has quite a great few things to say about altruists, all right? One of the first big things she seems to really be getting on the table is at least this, is that most of our ethical situations don't involve disasters, like many altruists, according to her, want us to believe. That there's always this horrible things that's happened. Speeding truck's about to get me, and I gotta save one person versus 10. What she's basically saying is, most of our lives are never in that situation. We are never in the emergency situation. And so first, we need an ethics that can help us with our day-to-day lives, our actual lived lives. But what she says about our actual lived lives, about how we should treat ethics then, as we will see, is really still no difference than how we should treat them in emergencies as well. She's kind of given us a guide, at least in her opinion, to how to deal with not only everyday life, but also emergencies. So let's see what she has to say. Now, eventually she's going to claim this, that we should always be rational. She takes that as an assumption. Human beings should always be rational, something we always should shoot for. And what is irrational in that? She claims sacrifice. What she claims is that human beings should never sacrifice oneself for another, okay? And what does she mean by irrational, okay? And therefore meaning if you're irrational if you sacrifice. That's her definition of being irrational, sacrificing oneself. And what that means is to give up a higher value for a lesser or non-value. And in contrast, being rational means maintaining your hierarchy of values. Or that means maintaining my higher values over my lower ones, never giving up a higher value for a lower one. Sacrifice is giving up a lower value, okay, so you're giving up a higher value for a lower one. That's sacrifice. Being rational, okay, is actually keeping my higher values over my lower ones, never giving them up for them, okay? She says we should never sacrifice. Now, at first, that sounds a little crazy. Okay, you're like, wait a minute. I sacrifice all the time. I sacrifice for maybe my kids. I sacrifice for my husband. I sacrifice for people sometimes when I do something in need. If a friend needs something, even a stranger, I may do this. But what she wants to say is that type of sacrifice is not really what she's talking about. And actually, because you may say some sacrifices are good, like I mentioned, she wants to say, no, what you're doing is actually misunderstanding the definition of sacrifice. Okay? Sacrifice is literally to give up a higher value for a lower or non-value. Okay? When she makes claims like, I gave up my chance to go to school to raise my children. Let's say you say something like this. She says, well, that's not really a sacrifice. You may use that word, but you're using it incorrectly. What you're actually doing is you actually value higher your kids' life, taking care of them, over you going to school. And if you could go back and change it, would you? Most people would say no, because actually I want to take care of my kids over me going to school. Well, that's not a sacrifice, because your kids are the higher value over your schooling. Therefore, you are being totally rational, and you did not sacrifice anything. She even claims here, if you're reading the Ethics of Emergency, a little further down, she says, first, let's repeat what sacrifice is. Sacrifice is a surrender of a greater value for the sake of a lesser one, or a non-value. Thus, altruism gauges a man's virtue by the degree in which he surrenders, renounces, or betrays his values. Okay? Then later she talks about love and friendship. She says, love and friendship are profoundly personal, selfish values. Love is an expression and assertion of self-esteem, a response to one's own values in the person of another. One gains a profoundly personal, selfish joy from the mere existence of the person one loves. If one's personal, selfish happiness that one seeks earns and derives from love. Or, excuse me, it is one's personal, selfish happiness that one seeks, earns, and derives from love. A selfless, disinterested love is a contradiction in terms. It means that one is indifferent to that which one values. So what she's trying to say is when I do something out of love for someone, or out of because they're my friend, or I do it in many of these reasons for our children, or something like this, that's not a sacrifice. What you are doing, okay, is actually being rational. Keeping my higher values over my lower ones. Concern for the welfare of those one's loved is a rational part of one's selfish interests, she says. Then she goes on to use an example about a husband and wife, and the wife who has cancer. She says, let's take what those crazy altruists say. Particularly, she seems to be talking about utilitarian altruists, okay? And she seems to go, this is what they would say. Let's say your husband was very wealthy, okay? And he had a wife, okay, who was very sick. And let's say he had a lot of money. But basically, in order to save his wife from this cancer she has, he would have to give up his entire wealth. Now, for him, that's not a sacrifice, okay? Because he would have no other. All he wants to do is to allow his wife to live. And his wealth is a lesser value than the health of his wife. And so he would easily give up everything to save his wife. And what Rand is trying to point out is that's not a sacrifice. But then let's think of what the altruist would say. Let's, for example, say you went to the hospital and your wife is sick, and you could use all your wealth to save her, but at the same time there was 10 other women with lesser forms of cancer that will die if they don't get help, but you could take that same amount of money and save 10 women. According to the altruist, which Anne says, the altruist would claim that you must save those 10 women and forget your wife, because you are doing more good, being more selfless, okay, than you are by saving your wife. In fact, you're being selfish and self-centered by only saving your wife. You should save those 10 poor women that you could and let your wife go. And then she asks, which one of these is the more horrific ethics? Okay? And if we look down here, let's see what she says. Distinguish, okay? See, the proper method of judgment when or whether one should help another person is by reference to one's rational self-interest and one's own hierarchy of values. The time, money, or effort one gives or the risk one takes should be proportionate to the value of that person in relation to one's happiness. Him saving his wife, would give him much more happiness than it would have saved those 10 women. And what she's saying in this example, that is perfectly fine. Who wouldn't do that? Why save those other 10 women if this is what should happen? The altruist would say, no, screw your wife. Go over and save those 10 women. What do you think? Ayn Rand obviously points to the way we should go is to be selfish. Okay? That's the good way to be. Okay? Now, let's go a little further. Okay? What about in emergency situations? What happens when, there's a disaster, a tsunami comes in, and people are in dire need of help? Okay, what's going on here, all right? And she says here, a rational man does not forget that life is a source of all values, and as such, a common bond among living beings, as against innate matter, okay, that other men are potentially able to achieve the same virtues as his own, and thus be of enormous value to him. This does not mean that he regards human lives interchangeable with his own. He recognizes the fact that his own life is the source, not only of all his values, but of his capacity to value. Therefore, the value he grants to others is only a consequence, an extension, a secondary projection of the primary value, which is himself. Okay? So what she's trying to say, let's say there's an emergency situation like a tsunami and a stranger is in need of help. Is that a sacrifice where I maybe perhaps risk my own life in order to help them? Okay? What she's saying is, no, all right? You shouldn't do something like this if the danger of it, okay, is something where I may die doing it and I'm maybe not a good swimmer. Maybe someone's drowning and I'm not a great swimmer. You probably shouldn't go and sacrifice yourself in it, okay? But let's say I value the idea of mankind much better, and I couldn't live with myself unless I went out there and did this, which, as she says, most rational people do. Someone's in need, most rational people believe they want to help them, okay? But the reason they want to help them is because it's an extension of oneself, okay? That's something I desire, I think is best. And so it's not really a sacrifice because I value humanity over perhaps myself, okay? Which is an extension of a value that I have myself, okay? So we get that? That actually valuing humanity, most rational people, okay, value humanity over themselves, which is a value which they hold themselves, okay? It's a selfish value, all right? They couldn't, it's like, almost like when someone enters, does something for someone, they go, I couldn't have lived myself with if I didn't do that. What she's saying is because that is a value they hold. They couldn't have lived with themselves. So when in an emergency situation something happens, it's not necessarily a sacrifice, it's just being rational. And emergency situations require rational people, okay? So even in emergencies, those disastrous things that are happening, even then, it seems Ayn Rand is still saying we should always maintain our hierarchy of values. Okay? Now, a few kind of interesting things you'll find Ayn Rand say. What does she mean that altruism leads to tyranny? What she basically means is people who believe in altruism believe in you must give up everything for others, must do this for other people, must do this to help them, things like this. And when you give up yourself to everyone else, what happens is those people dominate you. If you were always thinking about the other and never yourself, you will find yourself in a tyrannical form of government. As we'll see, a lot of her philosophy goes along with politics. Okay? Never doing things for myself ends up other people dominate me. Altruism, she thinks, leads to tyranny. Okay? Now, before you get this idea about Christianity, we'll do this now. She also believes that Christianity, the value that you should always value your neighbor, give up yourself for the others, she blames on religion. And she feels like that religion, especially Christianity and our culture here in America, is actually one of the biggest problems why we think altruism is a good thing. And one of her big protests is actually to get religion out of our government. A government should not be religious at all. Many people forget this. Ayn Rand was an atheist, a staunch atheist. Okay? Christianity, she feels, those values of always give up yourself, give up these things, she says, leads to weakness, leads to tyranny. And therefore, one of our first goals, she thinks, at least politically, should be to get rid of religion from the government. Doesn't mean you can't believe in religion on your own, free, private time. It's just, we should not be legislating values that are Christian. Okay? She also claims, with this idea, okay, what this leads to, if everyone's altruist and everyone, give up to this person or that person, it leads to a society of leeches and mooches. Okay? Basically, that if people believe that they can get things for free from those who work hard, they will continue to do that. And then more people realize, well, why am I working? Why am I doing this? So I can get things free, so I'll just give it to me. And everyone becomes leeches and moochers, and this thing spreads. This is why one of her big ideas, and a lot of people like to mention her, is in welfare politics. Okay, a lot of people use Ayn Rand's idea to attack a welfare form or welfare in general. Okay, should we give money to people for things? Should I work hard to give someone for someone else who cannot work? Is that what we should do? And basically, the idea is what that creates is a bunch of leeches and mooches. And if people can still get things for free and don't have to work for it, those people are going to teach their children, and on and on and on, they'll be getting more and more people who basically believe they can get something for nothing off the back of everyone else. And eventually, no one's going to work, okay? Now, some of us would probably seen in our lives places where welfare has been taken advantage of. But there's also probably cases where you've seen welfare has been a good thing for people who really need it. So some people say, maybe there's a middle ground. Maybe we need more regulation, something like this. And many people who follow Ayn Rand actually disagree with that. They said it's better if we just cut it off altogether, okay? And those people will either do one of two things. They will either figure out they have to work to do what they have to do, or they'll fall by the wayside and die. Which one are you going to do? If you have to do it, aren't you going to do it? Okay? Another reason is like, well, still, why can't we have, why cannot we have just some middle ground, somewhere where where we just kind of add some rules and regulations to it so it can't be abused. And there's a really great example of that. Many rules and regulations cost more money. And a lot of people don't like to do this because, for example, drug tests. Here's something that Florida tried a few years ago to make anyone on welfare take drug tests in order to hopefully kick some people off who weren't supposed to be on it, okay, and help save Florida taxpayers money. It ended up costing taxpayers way more money just to pay for the drug tests. Rules and regulations, and to implement them, to have more people involved, cost more money, more people giving into it. When the whole point, a lot of people don't want to. So a lot of times, maybe Ayn Rand's idea of just cutting it off right now and letting us, it may hurt for a while and cause some problems, but in the end, it may be better, maybe is a way to go. Now, that's not necessarily my opinion. I'm trying to give you kind of how someone who is into Rand may think. And now, just to finish, and so because I told you I'd keep this short, one other thing I always find interesting and ironic, okay, is Ayn Rand tends to be, and I don't take any sides on the political spectrum, but Ayn Rand tends to be someone on the right side of the aisle here in America where she's very popular. And many of the people understand her. Someone like Rand Paul, or his father, okay? Ron Paul, all right? Ron Paul named his son Rand after Ayn Rand, okay? Someone may understand what she's really saying, but there are so many other people on that side of the aisle that love to spout about who Ayn Rand was and her politics and claim to be kind of, following her, Randites, all right? But at the same time, it seems like they never really read her. For example, a few years ago when Paul Ryan was running for vice president, he talked about how he was a follower of Rand and all these things. Yet at the same time, okay, so he loved this idea here and the idea that you always, should look out for yourself. But at the same time, okay, he is a staunch Christian and loves bringing traditional values. And if you've ever read Rand, okay, Rand is not a Christian at all. In fact, many like someone like Paul Ryan, who calls himself kind of a Reaganite, someone who follows in Reagan's footsteps, the kind of ironic thing is one of the last essays that Ayn Rand ever wrote was, or articles, was why, if you're a Republican, you shouldn't vote for Ronald Reagan. Okay, and basically she sees that kind of conservatism in the Republican Party is actually something. All they're trying to do is bring Christianity, Christian values into the government. Okay, they're trying to bring this tyrannical altruism there in which they can dominate you. Though she tends to be a very far right person, many of the people who kind of, as I'm saying, in politics, who like to use her ideas, like to pick and choose. Say, oh, I like this one, but take that one out. And maybe that's okay. But if you're going to claim you're a follower of Rand, someone like Paul Ryan may have, okay, you may want to rethink what you're saying, okay? You don't really follow everything she's looking at. And that's kind of something that's very ironic. Rand, despite many Republicans like to talk about her, Rand is far more radical than they are, okay, whether they realize it or not. And so, if you guys have any more questions about it, I saw those interesting to bring up, please feel free to email me, and I'll see you next time.